So, did we wipe out the Neanderthals? It's one of the biggest questions we have about our own past. Here, it's a heavy question. It gets at who we are. Are we the kind of species that moves into a new place and just eliminates the competition? Or is the story more complicated? The short answer is it's complicated. The long answer is what we're going to talk about. There's no simple villain and victim here. It's a story about climate, food, babies, and maybe a little bit of fighting. But it's also a story about love, or at least sex, because the weirdest part is they're not entirely gone. Many of us carry a piece of them inside us right now. First, let's get a clear picture of who we're talking about. The Neanderthals. For a long time, we pictured them as dumb brutes, hunched over cavemen with clubs. That picture is completely wrong. It was based on one of the first skeletons ever found, which happened to be an old individual with bad arthritis. It bent his spine. And so for decades, we saw the whole species as stooped and stupid. They were not. Their brains were, on average, slightly larger than ours. That doesn't automatically mean they were smarter, as brain organization matters more than size, but it tells you they weren't simple creatures. They were human. A different kind of human, but human nonetheless. They were built differently. They were shorter and stockier than us, with thick, powerful bones and muscles. They had a barrel-shaped chest. This was a great adaptation for the cold. A compact body holds heat better. Think of a thermos versus a tall, skinny bottle. Their faces were different, too. They had a projecting mid-face, a weak chin, and a heavy, pronounced brow ridge over their eyes. Their noses were huge, which probably helped to warm and humidify the cold, dry air of Ice Age Europe before it hit their lungs. These were not new arrivals. Neanderthals and their ancestors had lived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were the original Europeans. They were incredibly successful. They survived through multiple ice ages. They were masters of their environment. They were apex predators. They were sophisticated toolmakers. They used a technique called the Levallois technique. It's a way of preparing a stone core so you can knock off a flake of a specific size and shape. It requires planning. You have to think several steps ahead. It's like a form of stone sculpture where you're creating the negative space. The tools they made, part of the Mousterian tool industry, were effective. They had stone points for spears, scrapers for cleaning hides, and sharp flakes for butchering meat. They were amazing hunters. We used to think they were just scavengers picking at leftovers from other predators. The evidence now shows this is wrong. They hunted huge animals, woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant cave bears. This wasn't a game of tag. These were dangerous, multi-ton animals. To hunt them, you needed cooperation. You needed a plan. You needed courage. They likely used heavy, thrusting spears. This meant they had to get up close and personal with their prey. You can see the result of this lifestyle on their skeletons. Neanderthal remains often show a pattern of injuries similar to modern-day rodeo riders. Broken bones, head trauma. It was a tough life, and they had a culture. It wasn't as flashy as what came later, but it was there. They buried their dead. This is a big deal. It suggests they had some concept of an afterlife, or at least a sense of loss and respect for the deceased. It shows a social bond that extends beyond life itself. In some graves, there are hints of grave goods, though this is debated. They used pigments like red ochre. What for? Maybe body paint. Maybe for treating hides. Maybe for art. At a cave in Spain, scientists found cave paintings that were dated to a time before modern humans were in Europe. The painters had to be Neanderthals. They created abstract symbols, not the stunning animal portraits we came to make, but it was a start. It was symbolic thought. They also collected eagle talons and shells, sometimes with holes drilled in them, likely to be worn as ornaments. They were not just surviving, they were living, they were creating meaning. So, this is the world we're walking into. Around 45,000 years ago, a new group of humans started trickling into Europe from the Middle East, and, before that, Africa. Our ancestors, Homo sapiens, we were different. We were taller, leaner, more slenderly built. Our skeletons were not as robust. We were built for warmer climates and for long-distance running. Our faces were flatter, our chins were prominent, and our skulls were more rounded, like a soccer ball, while theirs were longer, like a football. We also brought new technology. Our stone tool toolkit, called the Orignation, was different. It focused on making long, thin blades from a single core. It was an efficient way to make a lot of cutting edges. But the bigger deal was what we made from other materials. We were masters of bone, antler, and ivory. We made finely crafted needles for sewing-fitted clothing. We made spear throwers, or atlatls. This was a game changer. An atlatl is a lever that effectively makes your arm longer. It lets you throw a spear with much more force and from a safer distance. While a Neanderthal was getting close to a bison with a heavy spear, we could stand back and hurl a lighter, faster projectile. We also had art. We arrived in Europe and almost immediately started painting the walls of caves with breathtaking images of horses, bison, and lions. We sculpted small, intricate figurines like the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stattel. We created personal ornaments, beads made of mammoth ivory and shells. This suggests a complex symbolic world. It suggests we were communicating ideas, myths, and social identities in ways that were maybe more complex or widespread than what the Neanderthals were doing. And, perhaps most importantly, we likely lived in larger social groups. Our campsites are often bigger and more complex. We seem to have long-distance trade networks. Seashells from the coast are found hundreds of miles inland. This social connection is a massive survival advantage. If your local group is starving, you can call on relatives or allies a few valleys over. It's an insurance policy. Neanderthal groups seem to have been smaller and more isolated. So, for a few thousand years, from about 45,000 to 40,000 years ago, two kinds of humans shared the European landscape. What was that like? Was it a time of war? Did we march across the continent in a genocidal wave, killing every Neanderthal we met? This is the classic wipeout theory. It's a simple, dramatic story. We were the superior invaders. They were the primitive natives who stood in our way. We had better weapons, better tactics, and we simply exterminated them. It's a story we've seen play out many times in our own recorded history, but the evidence for this direct, violent replacement is surprisingly thin. We don't find ancient battlefields littered with the bones of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. We don't find Neanderthal sites with a layer of our spear points on top. We have found a few individual skeletons with signs of violence. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, one Neanderthal had a rib injury that looked like it was caused by a projectile weapon, the kind we were using. But one individual isn't a war. People fight. People kill each other. It happens. It doesn't prove a systematic campaign of extermination. What seems much more likely is not a blitzkrieg, but a slow, grinding process of competition. It's a concept from ecology called competitive exclusion. It says that if two species are competing for the exact same resources in the same place, one will eventually have a slight advantage. Over time, that slight advantage will be enough to push the other species out. The loser doesn't have to be killed off directly, they just have to fail to compete. They have fewer babies. Their population shrinks, they slowly fade away. What were our advantages? Maybe it was the spear thrower. Being able to hunt from a safer distance means fewer injuries. Fewer injured hunters means a more reliable food supply. Maybe it was our diet. While Neanderthals were hyper-focused on large game, we had a much broader menu. We ate big animals, yes, but we also ate fish, shellfish, birds, rabbits, and a wider variety of plants. We have evidence of us making nets and traps. This makes you more flexible. If the mammoth herds move on, the Neanderthals who depend on them are in trouble. But we could switch to fishing in the river or snaring rabbits. We had a more diversified economic portfolio, you could say. Or, maybe, the biggest advantage was social. Our larger networks meant we could share information over a wider area. Where are the herds moving? Where can you find good flint for tools? It also meant a larger pool of potential mates. Small, isolated populations like the Neanderthals seem to be are vulnerable to inbreeding. Over time, this can lead to a buildup of harmful genetic mutations and a less healthy population. Our bigger, more connected groups avoided this, and then there's the simple math of population growth. Some researchers suggest that even a tiny advantage in fertility or a slightly lower rate of child mortality for us would have been enough. If Homo sapiens populations grew just a couple of % faster than Neanderthal populations, it's a mathematical certainty that we would replace them over a few thousand years. They wouldn't have to die in battle, they would just be squeezed out. Imagine their hunting grounds slowly shrinking as our groups expanded. Their resources become scarcer, life gets harder, they have fewer children. Their groups get smaller and more isolated. Eventually, they just blink out. One last small group, living in a cold, forgotten valley, and then, but nothing. This paints a picture of us as a kind of invasive species. We didn't necessarily mean them any harm. We were just better at being us than they were. We were more efficient, more adaptable, more connected. And in the harsh world of the Ice Age, that was enough. But this isn't the whole story. Because something else happened when we met. Something that complicates the idea of a simple replacement. In 2010, scientists finished sequencing the Neanderthal genome. They took ancient DNA from fragments of bone that were tens of thousands of years old. And then they compared it to our DNA today. What they found changed everything. They found Neanderthal DNA in us. If you are of European or Asian descent, somewhere between 1% and 4% of your DNA comes directly from Neanderthals. People of purely African descent don't have this DNA because their ancestors didn't migrate out of Africa to encounter the Neanderthals in Europe and Asia. What does this mean? It means we had sex, and we had children, and those children were fertile and had their own children who passed those genes down all the way to us. This wasn't a rare one-off event. The genetic models suggest it happened multiple times. It proves that we weren't just two completely separate warring species. We were close enough to see each other as partners. So the story is not Woos versus them. It's Woos and them. This leads to a different theory. Maybe we didn't wipe them out. Maybe we just absorbed them. The idea is that the Neanderthal population was always much smaller than the incoming population of Homo sapiens. When our two groups met, interbreeding occurred, but because there were so many more of us, the Neanderthal gene pool was essentially diluted into our much larger one. Think of it like pouring a small bottle of red dye into a massive swimming pool. The water in the pool is now slightly changed. It has red dye in it, but the dye itself is gone, spread so thin you can barely see it. The Neanderthals might have vanished as a distinct population, with their unique skeletons and tools, but their genetic legacy lived on, carried forward within the human family. In this version of the story, there's no conflict. It's a story of assimilation. We met, we mixed, and we became one. This is a much more peaceful, more romantic vision of the past. The truth is probably a messy combination of both. There was likely competition. There were probably fights. Life was hard and resources were scarce. There were probably times when our groups clashed. But there were also clearly times of peace. Times when a lone individual might have joined another group. Times when two groups met and traded not just goods, but people. We don't know the social context of this interbreeding. Was it consensual? Was it the result of raids where one group stole partners from another? Was it a formal alliance between groups? We will likely never know, but we know it happened. Some of the genes we inherited from them are useful. Genes related to our immune system, helping us fight off diseases found in Europe and Asia, came from them. They had been adapting to those local pathogens for millennia. We were newcomers. Interbreeding gave us a genetic shortcut. We also got some genes related to skin and hair traits, which may have helped us adapt to different levels of sunlight. Of course, not all the genes were good. Some bits of Neanderthal DNA in us are associated with a slightly higher risk for things like type 2 diabetes, depression, and blood clotting disorders. These traits might have been useful in their Ice Age environment, but are less helpful in our modern world. So we have two major ideas we outcompeted them, or we absorbed them. But there's a third major character in this story, one that might have been more powerful than either of us. The climate. The world Neanderthals and modern humans lived in was not stable. The late Ice Age was a time of wild, rapid climate swings. We're not talking about slow, gradual changes over centuries. We're talking about massive shifts in temperature happening in the span of a few decades. An event called a Dansgaard-Oeschger event could see temperatures in the North Atlantic region plummet, or shoot up by several degrees Celsius very, very quickly. This would have been incredibly disruptive. Forests could turn into treeless steppe. The vast herds of mammoth and reindeer that both human groups relied on would have had their migration patterns completely upended. Some might have died out in certain regions. The Neanderthals were supremely adapted to a cold, stable environment, but they may have been less adaptable to this kind of rapid, chaotic change. Their focus on large game hunting was a great strategy when the large game was reliable. But when it wasn't, they were in trouble. Their small, fragmented populations would have made them especially vulnerable. A few bad years in a row, a failure of the hunt, and a small group could easily die out. We, on the other hand, might have been better equipped to handle the chaos. Our more varied diet gave us a buffer. Our larger social networks meant we could move and share information more easily, tracking the changing resources. Our new technologies, like needles for making better insulated clothing, might have given us a crucial edge in surviving the sudden cold snaps. So one powerful idea is that the Neanderthal population was already in deep trouble before we even showed up in large numbers. The unstable climate was breaking their world apart. Their populations were shrinking and becoming more isolated. They were on the brink of extinction anyway. We were not the cause of their decline. We just happened to arrive at the end of the party. Our arrival was the final push that sent an already teetering population over the edge. We were the final straw, not the whole storm. This leads us to what is probably the most realistic scenario. a perfect storm of factors. Start with a Neanderthal population that is already stressed. They are being hit by rapid climate change. Their food sources are becoming unpredictable. Their population is small and fragmented, and they may be suffering from a lack of genetic diversity. They are hanging on, but just barely. Then, a new human population arrives. We are more numerous. We have slightly better technology that makes us more efficient hunters and allows us to make better clothing. We have a more flexible diet. We have vast social networks that act as a safety net. What happens next isn't a war, it's just life. We move into the next valley over. We hunt the same animals. We gather the same plants. We are just a little bit better at it. We have a few more babies and more of them survive to adulthood. Our population grows. Theirs stagnates, then shrinks. In some places we meet. Maybe we avoid each other. Maybe we fight. And maybe, sometimes, we connect. We have children together. Those children are raised within our larger, more successful groups. The unique Neanderthal way of life slowly gets lost. Their culture fades, their language, whatever it was, goes silent. This process would not have been the same everywhere. In some regions, like the Iberian Peninsula in modern-day Spain and Portugal, Neanderthals held on for thousands of years longer than elsewhere. These might have been refuge areas where the climate was a bit more stable or where modern humans didn't penetrate for a long time. But eventually, the same pressures reached them. The last known evidence for Neanderthals dates to around 40,000 years ago. After that, silence. So, did we wipe them out? The word wipeout feels too active, too deliberate. It suggests a plan, a malicious intent. There is no evidence for that. We did not commit a prehistoric genocide. But did our arrival cause their extinction? Almost certainly, yes. We were the catalyst. We were the superior competitor. Our success came at their expense. Whether we intended it or not, our presence on the landscape made it impossible for them to continue their way of life. The ecological niche they had occupied for so long was now taken by us. It's an uncomfortable truth. Our existence as the only human species on the planet today is because all the others, including our closest relatives, are gone. Their story is a profound reminder that being successful and well adapted for 100,000 years is no guarantee of survival. Things can change. A new competitor can arrive. The world can shift beneath your feet. But it's also a story of connection. The fact that their DNA lives on in us is a strange and beautiful epilogue. It means that every time we fight off a certain kind of virus, or when we look at someone with a certain hair type, we might be seeing the ghost of the Neanderthals at work. They did not vanish completely. A part of them was woven into the fabric of our own species. They are our closest extinct relatives. Understanding what happened to them is, in a way, trying to understand a part of ourselves. Their fate shows us the razor's edge that separates survival from extinction. And it shows that the story of humanity is not a simple, linear march of progress. It's a messy, complicated, and sometimes tragic story of interaction, competition, and connection. They lost, and we won. But the line between us is not as clear as we once thought. It runs right through our own DNA.